Good evening and welcome to you in Radioland, at home and abroad, on Facebook. We see you, and on the several other online streaming platforms. It is Tuesday, 4th May, and it's 8 p.m. at Q95, the big station. I'm your host, Sheridan Gregoire, Mr. G. And with me tonight, prolific author, Justice Dr. Irving Andre in Canada, political scientist and instructor of politics and governance, Alex Bruno, is in Florida, and political scientist Dr. Dion George, Atlanta, Georgia. It is the 18th Tuesday of 2021. And as we always say, this is as good a year as any to revive the spirit of graciousness, of love, peace, prosperity, and unity among our Kalinago and Afro-Caribbean people. We're always live on Facebook at Wise QFM. So join the Q family, like our page right now, and get the regular notifications of what's happening and all the latest breaking local, regional, and international happenings. The big issues tonight: electoral reform, campaign finance reform, the intervention of Sir Dennis Byron, the crisis of governance, and ensuring justice for all. Let us remind ourselves that the genesis of this controversy on electoral reform and campaign finance reform was an email that advised Prime Minister Skerrit that there was madness going on at the Electoral Commission because they were talking about electoral reforms that could affect the Prime Minister's election winning legacy. The members of the commission were changed as a result, and now there are 3 alleged passport sellers on the government side on the commission. So the DLP government has now contracted Sir Dennis Byron to make recommendations for electoral reform. And Prime Minister Skerrit challenged opposition leader Lennox Linton to agree that as soon as Sir Byron's recommendations were submitted, they should be taken to Parliament immediately and passed into law. But alas, it appears that Sir Dennis Byron, he appears to be off to a shaky start with an uncontrolled, open-ended online questionnaire that he asked Dominica to fill out and submit. Sir Byron is yet to convene a conference of all parties, including the Dominican Labour Party, as well as NGOs and civil society groups, to make their case based on materials that they had already submitted to the Electoral Commission, along with the recommendations that have already been made by reputable agencies such as the OAS. And these recommendations altogether also include campaign finance reforms. There are also recordings of several substantial radio discussions that contain specific detailed recommendations for electoral reform and campaign finance reform for Dominica. And also case studies of the experiences of Jamaica, of St. Kitts, Antigua, and Barbados, among others, are also available and instructive. Most right-thinking Dominicans at home and abroad appear to be of the view that any recommendations from Sir Dennis Byron, which do not result from such an inclusive conference of all parties, as mentioned earlier, and that do not take into account the experience of our Caribbean sister islands, should be rejected and should not be brought anywhere close to the Dominica's Parliament for consideration. Justice, it is said, must appear to be done, but the antics of those with political influence makes this seem impossible, as justice cannot be dispensed on the basis of political callers. Together, we must therefore all face the challenge of protecting our democracy, preserving our constitution, observing our laws. So tonight, I am absolutely delighted to have our prolific author, Justice Dr. Irving Andre, political scientist and instructor of politics and governance, Alex Bruno, political scientist, Dr. Dion George, to help us unravel in the political maneuverings and machinations that may be lurking around and hiding in plain sight. So we all discuss, and we will discuss, the good, the bad, the ugly, and even the dangerous, with no anger, no malice, no personal attacks, no vilification, no divisiveness, just bringing back civility, caring society, good governance, proper electoral reforms, and campaign finance reforms. So we continue to recognize the imperative to eliminate poverty, to stop corruption, generate real income and higher living standards, a better quality of life and health, justice without delays, of course, the resilience and sustainability of our Kalinago and Afro-Caribbean brothers and sisters. So let's continue to debate these big issues of electoral reform, campaign finance reform, the intervention of today, and it's Byron, the whole question of the crisis of governance, and do this with clarity and civility. Let all ideas contend on accountability, transparency, and so on. And as we always say, so stay with us in this space for another great debate with our wonderful guests here tonight and get the answers to all your questions. Wherever you are in Dominica, in the region, and globally, join the conversation right now on the Global View on Q. Have your say as you do every Tuesday with me, Mr. G, only on Q95, the big station. So let us continue to remind ourselves, meanwhile, that Dominica still has too much widespread poverty, too much mendicancy, too much unemployment, insufficient jobs, inadequate housing, increasingly brutal crimes, a struggling economy, insufficient affordable housing and health insurance and healthcare. And we are, in fact, still plagued with misdirected foreign policies and conduct that damages our international image. None of that, of course, is driven by our planned domestic economic or cultural interests, has mostly resulted in a questionable diminishing amount of foreign earnings passport economy, weak financial management that translates into extensive wastage of resources. So we remind ourselves of the big picture then is to eliminate this poverty and unemployment. So wherever you are in Dominica, in the region, and globally, join the conversation. In this space, please write down these numbers, but Lambi will give them to you later. 767-449-3095, 3096, 3097, or 616-4257. From overseas, you can call 305-432-9624. Our engineer, Sherwin Norris, keeping us on the air as usual. And Lambi Lambert Charles is on the console at Q95 directing the traffic. He will take your calls. As usual, we discuss, we recommend, but you, the listeners, you decide what you think about the information that we disseminate. But as we always do, we say a heartfelt thank you to healthcare providers and frontline workers in this dreaded COVID-19 situation. Please follow the guidelines and protocols and play it safe, stay alive. Shout out all of our Q family listeners over and abroad. Happy to have you with us tonight, wherever you are in your neck of the woods in Dominica, in the region, and globally. Let's get to work. As I go now to our prolific author, Justice Dr. Andre, to make his opening remarks and get the ball rolling with the initial contribution to the conversation. I look forward to Justice Andre also educating us on one or two issues like the pillars of democracy, pillars of a democracy, something of what constitutes election offenses, international campaign to protect free and fair elections, and proving the criminal offense of treating, among other things. So let me just go over to Justice Dr. Andre, if you put on your mic and you can welcome Dr. Andre.
Thank you. Thank you for your wonderful introduction, Mr. G. It is obviously the work of many hours of deep thought and the preparation. Let me say good night to the esteemed panelists we have this evening, Professor George, erudite, eloquent, Professor Bruno, man of many hats, pollster, calypsonian, playwright, professor, government. It can't get much better. We have the experienced Sherwin, and we have Lambi with us, guiding us through the storm. But there's a disconnect tonight. Mr. G, you made reference to the pandemic that is wreaking so much havoc throughout the world, in India, in Brazil. The United States appeared to be winning the battle against it, but in some other troubled spots in the world, it's an existential fight. Where big countries like India, for example, are proving that they do not have all the resources to successfully wage that existential battle against this pestilence of biblical proportions. And in that context, we in Dominica, we are debating what are the elements of free and fair elections. There is a significant dissonance because the whole question of free and fair elections has been discussed ad infinitum. It has been the subject of a number of influential reports from NGOs, United Nations, the Organization of American States, civic organizations right here in Dominica, and a local report which has the blessings of a biblical authority as to the way forward. So we don't need any more guiding lights as to the constituent elements of free and fair elections. But here it is in this time of scarcity, in this time of destruction, in this time of pain, we are discussing something which has been put to rest in terms of its constituent element by a number of distinguished organizations and individuals. So there is a kind of surreal atmosphere to our discussions tonight. We do not have money to give Dominicans a little stimulus, to purchase something to put on the table, a little balau perhaps, a little Johnny cake perhaps. But we have hundreds of thousands of dollars to give to a potentate to produce a report which I predict will be at odds with all those influential reports that have been produced with respect to the requirements of free and fair elections in Dominica. How can we justify that? Our laws are clear. The laws with respect to eligibility to vote in Dominica are clear as day. They need no further interpretation. Other island countries have provided all the interpretive dimensions to these laws that we need. If what I heard this week is correct in terms of the survey of Lord Byron, then it clearly calls into question the legitimacy of that report. How can you have a survey to get the views and opinions of Dominicans if there is no internal mechanism to decide and to ascertain and to verify that it is Dominicans, voters, who are giving their opinions with respect to this important issue? If Mr. Erasmus B. Black from Guyana can submit, can fill out a form, can fill out the survey, and you cannot even ascertain whether or not he is a bona fide Dominican voter, then how could this be legitimate? If in filling out this form, it asks you, if you so choose, to submit another one. So a voter can submit 10, 15, 20 completed forms with no one knowing the better. How can this be a legitimate exercise? It calls into question the legitimacy of this whole process. And it leads to one fundamental conclusion. The result is preordained. It has been tailored to produce one type of result. And sadly, at the end of the day, we will be $500,000 poorer. What's the price of dasheen? What's the price of balau? What's the price of a lime? Are there not Dominicans who could use some help to purchase essentials, to give them a square meal on a daily basis? Are there not Dominicans who need adequate clothing? Are they not school children who need help to go to school? And if they do, then what is the efficacy of having another report when we have all the answers we need? But again, as I said, it calls into question the legitimacy of this whole exercise. That's the problem. We seem to have these huge amounts of money to expend on initiatives that will not serve the Dominican people. Again, every indication is that this whole process has one fundamental goal: to produce a certain type of result. That is the troubling thing about this whole exercise. It drags Dominicans jumping and screaming into a rabbit hole where they are conscripted to produce a result that's going to put a dagger in the heart of free and fair elections in Dominica. Why would such a large amount of money be spent if the results were not known? Mr. Gregoire, did you not allude to the fact that the opposition was challenged to accept the report and to enact it in the parliament? Why the confidence that the report should be accepted? Wasn't there a previous report done by someone called Mia Motley? I don't know who she was. Why was it not shepherded into the parliament and enacted as law? Why, after all, Mia Motley is supposed to be our friend? She took Ross University and said, thank you. She didn't say, boy, Dominica is in such a horrible state after Maria. The last thing we should be doing in Barbados is to take the little what Dominica has. They don't have anything, but we will take it anyway. Didn't she produce a report in terms of electoral reform? Go and ask these fellows who used to be in the Electoral Commission what happened to it. Where is it? What were its findings? Why did you not like it? Why did you confine it to the garbage bin? And there are reasons why we have to be mindful of this whole process. A few years ago, there was someone called Cabral Douglas. Cabral had a case against the government. It ended up in the CCJ. Cabral made some damaging allegations about apprehension of bias because of the chief of the CCJ then found himself in Guyana at a time when the heads of governments of the Eastern Caribbean were meeting. They were in CONCAV. And Cabral complained that the decision was released to our prime minister before it was released to the litigants. The local bar jumped on poor Cabral as if he was a pilau lunch from a Huawei. They attacked him with a ferocity which one can say is not necessarily surprising, but he raised those concerns about the apprehension of bias. And just coincidentally, the esteemed jurist has been asked and tasked to produce this report. We shall see where it goes. But you made reference, Mr. G, in your opening about a shaky start. Sadly, it is more than that. It is an ominous start. It has harbingers of danger. And We will wait to see if that prophecy comes true. But every indication is that it will. And once again, Dominica will be the poorer for it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and thank you so much, Justice Dr. Irving Andre. A lot of food for thought there. You put a little meat on the little bone that I put out there when I started. But I know that we have one of the distinguished sons of our soil, a guy who's known by all Dominicans, a very bright fellow, very humble, I must say, from the time I've known him. But there's no doubt that he is a very smart fellow. And I want to turn now to this gentleman that we call Alex Bruno. And I wanted to ask Alex to extend and add value to what Dr. Andrea said to us tonight. And I'm sure that you will have other dimensions that you want to add to the conversation. So, Alex, let me go over to you and tell us all about what you have on your mind.
Well, good evening again, my dear brother and brothers, including Lambi and Sherwin, who is keeping us live and looking and sounding as well as I believe we look and sound. It gives me no pleasure to sit here to discuss a very serious matter as electoral reform, especially knowing that there are people who are going to interpret or misinterpret our honest intention to share a narrative with the people which they should know as to the fears of the present operation. And I say, even before I say anything else, that I respect professionalism. I respect people who have achieved. So Byron would have been one of those people, one of the better minds of the Caribbean. And my intervention here is by no means in any way challenging his authority, especially when it comes to the letters of the law, or any other person for that matter. I'm all about the systems. I'm all about understanding the situation and trying to articulate what I understand from it. So I'm going to take it from the angle of the voting rights, not fundamental. Some people say voting is fundamental right. It is not. It is not one of those fundamental rights. It is a right, declared right, but it's a residency privilege, which suggests that by law you should reside in an area. And as Dr. Andre said, we have laws which guide when one ceases from being a resident or not. So we have laws in place to take care of the problems that we have had in Dominica. And we have had recommendations from all and sundry in terms of what we can do. So the use of Sir Byron with a huge price tag, with all the machination, especially the latest online poll that we saw surface, suggests to me, and I'm hoping the same will be said by Dion, because we share the same profession, that there is something being cooked. And it is not fair, it's not right, and I'm going to call it as it is. So voting is a right, but you must be resident by law to have that responsibility or the privilege to vote. An online survey with no boundaries, no control variables, nothing placed within the method to flush out abuse, ambiguities, errors. Just present it to the world so that Dominicans can react. Just does not add up. It does not make sense in any shape or form, no matter how you look at it. Now, there are people who are saying, oh, it's just a survey, which means nothing. No, it does not mean, and it does not mean nothing. It is a significant operation that the authorities are going to use to say, voila, here's what Dominicans think, and here's what Dominicans want. And this is a very lethal document that can be used to, as justification to have the legislature make electoral reform the law of the land. And when it becomes that, you have another Mugabe case on your hand in Dominica, or another Assad, or another, well, let me not continue with the names, but you get the point. So we cannot take that too very lightly. We should not just brush it off and say, oh, I'm not going to take part in the poll. I took the poll twice, just to prove that it is ambiguous and just ludicrous. It is flawed. Why present that to our people? I mean, is there anybody else besides us on the panel who's seen that the discrepancies and asking? I mean, I had 2 of my students take the poll, and I recorded them too in their reaction, and I'm going to air it on my Facebook page later on. Having taken the poll, one from Haiti, one from Jamaica, took the poll about the elections in Dominica. And then I had a discussion with them about it. One agreed that they could take it because Dominica is small and we need other people's advice. And then when I brought up the question about, well, can somebody who is not from America give opinion on America's internal polling? She said, no, America is a different story. So what is good for America and other nations and Jamaica and Barbados and Antigua is not good for Dominica. That's pretty much what she was saying. And then the other student told me, no, it's crazy. That cannot be. Anyway, long story short, I think coming out from what Dr. Andrew said, the online polling or the online idea to gauge the opinion of the Dominicans should be abandoned. If it is not, I am going to be one of those challenging it in the courts. And I have the evidence to do. It is just too ambiguous. As a professional, I cannot see it and not see it. So I'm saying it, and I will challenge it. Not because I am against reform, but because I just think it is just too outlandish for me not to stand up and say something about it. My children and grandchildren will not forgive me if I had not, in my profession and capacity, said something about it. So that is one. Quickly, the other point I think that goes with the online polling is I think it deals with manufacturing an opinion. So leaders, authoritative leaders, can create situation where they have an opinion from the masses manufactured to flash to say, look, I am legally whatever, because here's what my people want. And that we cannot understate. And that's one of the reasons I think this is being done the way it's being done. Again, I'm not casting aspersions at the good doctor, the good luminary, Sir Byron. No, I'm just saying that probably he's in an operation. Well, my humble suggestion is that the poll is necessary, but it should be done face to face. The same people who do the poll during election time, I think CADRES or CAPA or any agency would be better used to poll the Dominicans at their homes, or send a mail-in survey and let them return the survey and then use that as an opinion. Having people willy-nilly just suggest what they think is not a guiding light to what I think is going to happen. And I'm seeing so much down the line that we'll speak about a bit later on, which we can avoid only if we do things right. And I think we have an opportunity to do it right. And I'm hoping that an announcement will be made in light of the discrepancies that we have cited, that this idea of getting an opinion online that's going to be guiding a decision or a suggestion to the legislature should be abandoned. That is just it's not going to be to sit right on our record. And quickly before I pass it on to the next panelist, before open discussion, electoral reform is not a matter for political parties to give any party advantage. Electoral reform is a tool that is put in place to safeguard the democracy of our country, to safeguard the peace and tranquility of our country, and to deal with the sanctity of the vote. It has nothing to do with I have a very protective family member, Charlie, who just gets on crazy when somebody comes at the door. So I'm sorry about his intervention. So I will say quickly that the reform has nothing to do with a party getting advantage or disadvantage. It is a tool that has been given to us by the framers, that has been used many places to help to protect and safeguard the sanctity of our democracy, especially the vote. The vote is the most significant, or one of the most, if not the most significant asset that a nation has in terms of sovereignty and in terms of its you can even say rule of law too, because one person should cast one vote. And if we cannot protect the vote, at least we are in some serious problems. I don't think we have been able to protect Dominica's vote for the past maybe couple of decades. And this conversation that we're having, I hope it's a start of a different conversation for us to relook where we are. I do not think that the incumbent should try its utmost to enforce itself to remain on the people the way that they have been doing. I think what has been happening is wrong. I think what is setting up to be presented to the government is wrong. And at the end of the day, I hope I'm proven wrong by a result or suggestion from So Byron, which suggests otherwise. Anything less than what the OAS, the Commonwealth, and the local consortium have come up with would be out of place, I think. So let's see what happens, but let us prepare for what is going to happen if the results or if the suggestions coming from this new operation is not in keeping with the wishes of the people. That is how I would like to begin the presentation, and I pass it back over to you, Mr. Gregoire.
Yes, Alex, Bruno, thanks a lot for that. Um, you said it very well, and I think you took it from where Justice Irving Andrew left off. He was very apprehensive about what the result would be if the thing was pursued along the path that it started now. And certainly, I mean, this is not anything new. I mean, let's remind ourselves. It's not like we're jumping into something nobody else has ever done before. I believe Sir Byron is from St. Kitts. St. Kitts has done that exercise and seems to have done it very successfully. Jamaica has done it. I mean, Antigua has done it in months. They didn't take years, they took months. Several other islands have done that successfully. I'm not sure why we need all of this, hoopla to do this. I mean, and again, in terms of this form, I mean, here it is that anybody can fill out that form 10 times, 100 times. Anybody, any professor at a university can tell his whole class, do this thing how many times? And anybody who's an astute technocrat, somebody who's good in computers, can just have some kind of a piece of software and just do that thing 1,000 times. Just repeat it 1,000 times. So I'm just going to go over to, as we get going here, Dr. Dion George, because I mean, you can see, Dr. George, that there are some questions arising already on this. And as we go into the meat of our discussions later on, I'm sure we'll bring out a lot more of this. But I mean, in final analysis, I mean, as I said earlier in my opening remarks, I mean, the genesis of this whole thing, because remember, let us remind ourselves, gentlemen, and our listeners, that the Electoral Commission started off a process of electoral reform. Let us also remember Dr. Andre advises that somebody called Mayor Motley also had presented a report about electoral reform recommendations. And let us not forget that the reason why the Electoral Commission did not proceed is because somebody in their wisdom said to the Prime Minister, if you allow them to do this, you will lose your election winning legacy. What does that really mean? Does it mean that if you have proper election reform like St. Kitts and Jamaica and so on, that the incumbent will lose the election? Is that what that email was intended to say? I don't know. The person who wrote it may very well know what they were talking about. But Dr. Dion George, maybe you can help us out with that. Let's go over to you now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gregoire. Good evening to my panelists, Dr. Andre and Professor Alex Bruno, of course, Lambi and Sherwin. Thank you so much. Good evening to the listening public. Special good evening to our Facebook friends. I see some folks already holler good evening to me, and so thank you for that. I appreciate it. Special good evening to the people of Salisbury and to Dominica at large. And of course, we want to invite the Holy Spirit to such an important discussion, the Holy Spirit being the fountain of all wisdom. And so we thank the Holy Spirit for being here. And so the question becomes, why are we discussing this, right? What is the purpose? Are we on some agenda to offend a particular person or a particular group of people? Are we here in sincerity to educate and to discuss? And I think it's the latter. I think this is a salient issue, electoral reform and campaign finance reform. And it's an ongoing issue that has to be brought to the enlightenment of the citizenry. And so the more we can engage in discussion of sort, I think it benefits our public. So that's number one. Tonight, I think we are discussing poignantly the survey that is available for the next 3 weeks as constituted by Sir Dennis Byron. And so the first thing I would like to discuss is to put certain things in perspective. And so what is public opinion, right? What is public opinion? And by simple definition, public opinion is the values and the attitudes that people have about a particular issue, an event, or a personality. And so in context to what we're talking about, the public opinion, I think, that is being measured is the whole issue as to how people feel about electoral reform. The next thing I would like to discuss is what are the sources of our public opinion? Where do we get to think about certain things? How do we learn those ideologies that we have? And the process by which one does that is a process called political socialization. By definition, political socialization is the process by which one acquires their political values and their attitudes. For example, if my mother was a Freedomite and I grew up in the house, more than likely I might have some other ideologies, right? And my dad being a Labourite, perhaps I could take some of his ideologies as well. And so parents and friends can influence the way we think about politics. Education is another one, another agent, if you will, of political socialization. Typically, they say people with a degree tend to vote more. They say college professors tend to be more liberal. But also the media plays a very important role in shaping the way we think about political phenomenon, such as electoral reform. For example, I would put the question to the listening public. Do you believe the people that listen to QFM share the same political ideology as the people who listen to Kyrie FM? Perhaps not. Perhaps they have total different views on the very same issue. And so herein one can see the need and the reason why the media can influence the way you think about a particular issue. The last example of that I would give is an event. For example, and I often refer to that, is the tear gas in Salisbury. Yes, that is part of political socialization. Someone could have been a Labourite, and because of what happened in Salisbury, and they are from Salisbury, they might say no more. Because of that event, it really shaped the way they think about politics. Another one can be celebrities. If there is an election and there is a very popular artist, and any one party was supposed to bring that artist and let it be available to the public, especially if it's free, that can influence the way people view that particular party, that particular leader, or even the issues that they deal with. And so these are just some examples to start off the conversation about public opinion. I guess a more poignant question is, what is the role of public opinion in a democracy? More specifically, what is the use of Sir Dennis Byron's survey? Well, I will answer that question verbatim, i.e., exactly what is on the survey. And so according to the survey, which I took it already, it says, and I quote, "The electoral reform survey is intended to measure the level of satisfaction and opinions of all stakeholders in the electoral process on matters related to the electoral process and reform in Dominica. Period." End of quote. And so this is what it is for, to measure satisfaction and opinions of all stakeholders. Interestingly, the definition of opinion polls is this: it's a systematic study of a defined population, analyzing a representative sample's view to draw inferences about a larger public's view. What that simply means in layman terms is that there is a defined, meaning that there is a sample, that there is a framework of people that is controlled, for which one is analyzing, for which you're asking questions, you are seeking opinions, to which one will derive inferences that you can apply to the general public. And so what it means, you won't ask everybody, but you have controlled a certain portion of the population, which then you can make a general assumption of the entire population. It's like you don't have to eat the entire cake to know what the cake tastes like. If the cake is well mixed and so forth, if you just get a portion of the cake, then it makes sense what the cakes look like. Interestingly, in measuring public opinion, there are some basic criteria that we must meet. First of all, random sampling. We want to make sure that every element of the population has an equal chance of being represented. That's number one. Number two, we want to make sure that we have a sample frame, i.e., a designated group of people from a set of respondents that will be tested. I mentioned that because what we have right now, we do not have that. We don't have a sample frame. In fact, the sample that we are gleaning from this survey, it is literally infinity. There is no control. And if you recall the definition for what a sample frame is, it must be confined. It must have a certain group of people. For example, there is something in political science called refining the sample. And what that means is you're going to sample or question persons who are likely to vote. You don't want to question somebody from the Middle East who has nothing to do with Dominica. You want to question people perhaps who are eligible, perhaps who are likely to vote. Now I say that with a thin pinch of salt, because if you understand the definition from the website, it says that all stakeholders, that's a very broad term, and it's not qualified, i.e., perhaps stakeholders does not mean citizens of Dominica. Perhaps stakeholders have a broader meaning, right? And so this is something to think about. The other thing I want to touch on are the different polls that exist. And of course, we are just running through them for, perhaps educational purposes. The first one is called a benchmark poll. This is a poll that is taken at the beginning of a race. And so if right now we're going to run the election, they might say, well, 57% of the chance Labour Party might win, 52% the workers might win, whatever. Right? It's just at the start of the poll. Then there is something called straw polls. Interestingly, straw polls are not scientific. The example that I gave a while ago about the random sample and measuring the frame, that is scientific. Straw polls are non-scientific research. What that means is you're not controlling who you're sampling, and the result might be biased. For example, in 1920 in the United States, there was a survey taken by a company called the Literacy Digest, and they predicted a particular election, and they were wrong. They were so wrong about their predictions. And you know why they were wrong? Because it was not scientific. What they did, in essence, is they took persons from the phone book and just went from A, Albert, Adriana, and just called those folks and says, hi, who are you going to vote for? And they basically said who they were going to vote for. Interestingly, in the late 1920s, thereabout in the United States, they were experiencing what is called the Great Depression, the falling of the market. And very few people had phone. And so the result of that election was very biased. They got one view. And so the result that came out was, of course, skewed, right? And so that's straw polls. It's non-scientific, right? In this situation here, I'm not sure, again, what is the use of it. Based on what they said, it's to satisfy all stakeholders. And perhaps we are the one assuming that it's for Dominicans, right? There is something called bushfire polls. Bushfire polls are internal polls. And of course, what most people are familiar with is exit polls. That is who win the election and how it comes out. The other interesting thing I want to touch on is what we should look out for. And I think that's where the public can engage in actually what is going on. And so some of the things we should look out for in a survey, one, it's called social desirability effect. What that means is people will give you an answer, not because that's what they really think, but that's because they think that's what you want to hear. And so, for example, you might have no idea what electoral reform is, And somebody might ask you, do you think we need electoral reform? And in your mind, you're thinking, I should say yes. And you just say yes, right? But you yourself don't even know what you're talking about, really. You just give an answer that you think the person would like. It's called the social desirability effect. The other one is called the bandwagon effect. And the bandwagon effect is a shift in electoral support to a candidate whom the public opinion seemed to show as the forerunner. And so you have someone that says, for example, oh, this person is leading the poll. And all of a sudden, everybody just go around like a bandwagon supporting that candidate. And the other one is the boomerang effect. I like that word, the boomerang effect, which is the discrepancy between candidates who were rated very high in the polls, and then when election comes, the result came out differently. These are things one has to be very careful about. Finally, my last point before I turn it over to the moderator is I read the poll and I felt it would be fair to share with the public some of my personal thoughts. When I say my personal thoughts, it's not just because of where I'm from, and it's not because of my idiosyncrasies, but it's because of my profession. It's what I think about some of the questions. And so I'll share with you. Some of the questions, I must say, are very standard, and it looks like it's professionally done. I will say that as starters. For example, they ask your age group, your demographic, what part of the world you are in. I guess it says your area and you have to put it in. And so these are very standard, so that's good. The other thing I thought was interesting is what they call normative questions. It's a question that asks you to say yes or no, good or bad. And so some of the questions that they have here, it asks, for example, are you satisfied? And the answer you have to give is yes or no, satisfied or not satisfied. And so processing for issuing ballot paper. Again, it's a normative question. Are you satisfied with the processing of issuing a ballot paper? My humble opinion, based on my profession, sometimes these questions can mislead people. Some people don't even know how the processing of a ballot paper is. And you're asking them, are they satisfied or not? They don't even know what it is. And so when they give an answer, the result you get can be totally skewed. Another question, are you satisfied or are you not satisfied with the sanctions applied to political parties who cause offenses? I have not seen anybody have sanctions for offenses. Right now, as we speak, I think in coming weeks or months, there is a case before the court, but I have not seen any sanctions for offenses thus far. All right. Other questions that I thought could be suspect, or I thought very interesting, to say the least, are the interval questions. It's the categorical questions. It's not normative, yes or no, but it asks you to measure, are you satisfied, dissatisfied, or you don't know? Do you agree? Do you strongly agree? So it's in intervals, it's in categories. One of the issue questions is national ID cards should be for the entire population. And so you have to say whether you totally disagree, whether you agree, whether you strongly agree. And I thought I would share some of my thoughts on that. And so the question again, recall, national ID cards, should it be for the entire population? I think, what about persons that are not eligible to vote? Should they get a national ID card? And so I guess the next question becomes, what would be the purpose for a national ID card? Would it be only for voting, or would it have multiple reasons? Just a thought. Another question is, national ID cards should be produced at the polling station. I am not sure what that is trying to measure. I'm not sure if there should be an office that produces the national ID cards, and so one can go and pick it up. Perhaps it would be legit and structured, as opposed to a different police station. You can reach late and you can just get your card at the same time. I don't know. Another question I thought was interesting is, once the national ID card has been reissued, person should be allowed to vote. So they're saying, let's say you lost your card and you get another card. Can you be allowed to vote? My thought on that is, well, this depends on the previous question as to residency, the previous question, if I may, it says that national ID cards should be valid for a period of 5 years. The question says a national ID card should be valid for a period of 5 years. I have a concern with those questions and how the result come out. For example, if the result come out by a majority of people, yes, it should be valid for a period of 5 years. Then we deal with a bigger issue of residency, as we have discussed on this program before. Being away for 5 years or being in the country present, does that really make you a resident? And I think in previous shows, we have discussed that the Constitution clearly says that a resident is somewhere you live. And even if you work in somewhere else, you expect to come back there. And so being overseas for 4 years and then coming back just before the election, does that really make you a resident of Dominica? And so these are things we really have to consider. Now, the last thing I'll mention before I pass it to the moderator is something I find extremely interesting. There were some questions that were directed specifically to the Electoral Commission, and I'll read some of them for you. It says, for example, the Electoral Commission should have power to influence regulation relating to standard elections. So you have to say whether you agree, whether you disagree. Another one. Well, let me just say what I think. I think the Constitution already deals with that. The answer is yes. The Electoral Commission do have the power to deal with matters regulating standard of elections. Next question. What do you see as the role of the Electoral Commission? I mean, when I took the survey and I saw that, I'm saying, are we trying to reinvent the wheel? Don't the Constitution of Dominica speaks very clearly what is the role of the Independent Electoral Commission? And so the obvious question has to be asked. What would the results of this survey be used for? And again, you know, a sensible individual would say, if, according to Professor Bruno, he could have his classes answer that question and say, no, I don't think the Electoral Commission should have anything to do with elections. Then where do we stand? Public opinion says that the Electoral Commission should. And so I thought some of the questions need to be more targeted. Some of them are too broad, too vague, and the results can more than likely be skewed, especially because it's not controlled. So these are my initial comments. And of course, Mr. Moderator, I'll turn it back to you. Thank you.
Yes, and thank you, Dr. Dion George. And there's a lot of food for thought there. And I know, Alex, I saw you throughout the number of things I think you yourself have on your mind as somebody who has engaged in that kind of practice. I know that you have a number of things that you want to raise there. But let me go first to Justice Irving Andre for his further thoughts on all of that, considering now all of what both Alex and Dion have said about the actual poll and about what it is that it is trying to achieve. Dr. Andre?
Well, quite frankly, the contributions of Dr. Bruno and Dr. George, they have just increased one's apprehensions and one's foreboding about the results of this poll. Because if Mr. Bruno is correct, Dr. Bruno, I should say, that the poll is very important, because that will serve to justify what electoral reform, the configurations of electoral reform, then it's very scary. Because if two of his students, one from Haiti, the other one from the USA, can participate in that survey, then quite frankly, what is to stop probably some disciples for completing 25 surveys or 50 surveys? The whole thing will become a joke. And if that is what is going to be used to change Dominica's electoral laws, then God help us. And that is the fundamental problem. What the learned panelists have said have just reinforced those reservations, those apprehensions, those fundamental concerns about the justification of this. You cannot cherry pick who is going to do some study in terms of reform to get the right result. We've had various entities reputable entities who have no interest in the outcome of Dominicans' elections, who were not paid to come up with any type of recommendations, who have given us a clear view as to the parameters of genuine electoral reform. We have a present prime minister who at one point was paid allegedly $50,000 to do a report on electoral reform in Dominica. You cannot discard all these reports and cherry pick one which you hope will produce the result that you're seeking, and then triumphantly run into Parliament and say, ha, 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 here are the new laws of Dominica insofar as voting is concerned. You're looking for trouble. You're looking to emasculate, eviscerate the existing electoral laws. You're looking to run roughshod over the rule of law and order in Dominica. We must all be concerned. Law and order is not some abstract concept taught in universities in the States, whether in Miami, whether in Georgia. They govern our lives. They govern our form of life. You have big struggles as we speak in Myanmar, in other parts of the world, where people are dying on the streets to protect those cherished values that they have, because they understand only too well what it will mean to live, whether under an autocracy, whether under a pharaohocracy, whether under a concubinocracy. I don't know what it is, but they understand the perils of living under that form of autocratic rule. And that is the lesson being sent to us today by other citizens in other countries, that their form of government is very essential to their very being. And any challenge to it is an existential threat, which many people are prepared to give their lives. I'm not saying that, frankly, Dominicans should willy-nilly sacrifice themselves, but this is a cherished value. The fact of the matter is Dominica was founded as a democracy. This constitution is designed to ensure the longevity of this fledgling democracy. And quite frankly, democracy is not a spectator sport. We have a role to play in the preservation of it. Otherwise, the mighty will become the right, or might will become right. And that is the significance of raising concerns where there is a perceived threat. I hope we're wrong. I hope this is all song and fury signifying nothing. But what we have seen are ominous signs that that is the result which is being sought. Mr. Gregoire, you alluded to it in your presentation initially. This is not rocket science. You know, this is a dire threat that confronts us as our existence as a democratic country based on the rule of law. And it seems to me that this is the most important tenet that we have, to live in a country where our freedoms are cherished. We can express our views, we can vote. We do not have to worry about our vote being diluted to a point of insignificance. And that's the existential threat that we face. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Justice Dr. Irving Andre. I'm going to go over to Alex Bruno in a minute, but a couple of things I just wanted to do. First of all, I wanted to just alert Lambi that we cannot forget that we have lots of people who are listening who would like to make a contribution. And I really want to say, Lambi, we want to allow you to take the call. So, I mean, if you feel that you're having some people calling, before we go to Alex, let's take some calls and give them the numbers and let's hear them when they call, Lambi. We're not hearing you, Lambi.
Again, good evening. The numbers are 767-449-3095, 449-3096, 449-3097, 616-4257. The overseas number, 305-432-9624. There is someone on the overseas line. Let me beg of you to be as brief as you can. Our panelists are waiting to continue. Go ahead, please, caller.
Hello. Hello.
Go ahead, caller.
Yeah. Yes, Dominica is already a socialist country under the present regime. There's no doubt about it.
We can dream as much as we want to dream, but Dominica is already a socialist country. When a man decides that the opposition has no say in parliament, what does that tell you? When people decide to have a peaceful demonstration, taxi drivers, and then you send policemen with a submachine gun, you even beat up one of the drivers. That is what happens in China, Hong Kong. So Dominica is already a communist country under this bloody scallywags we have calling themselves prime minister or government. Thank you, sir.
We have a few more calls coming in. Let's take them before we continue. Let's go. Go ahead, please, caller.
Yes, good evening. Good evening. Hello, good evening.
Could you turn your, whatever you have in the background,
Okay.
turn it on, please?
Yes, I'm very interested to really follow the program on electoral reform. And I find that it's a very serious. Hello?
Please go ahead with your call, 95. Caller.
Hello, good night.
Yes, good night. Go ahead, please.
Good night. Good night to the panelists. Hello?
Good evening. Go ahead.
Hello?
I think it's this device, it's not this on the phone. Your call is still clear? Okay, so it's not the phone. All right, so you can turn off your transmitter, please, so we don't get feedback into the system. Let me just go over to Alex. Sorry, we seem to be having some technical difficulties with some of the phones there, Alex. But one of the things, as you come on, Alex, I wanted to just remind us, we really cannot fool ourselves about what we know. What we know is that the reason why this departure from what the Electoral Commission was already doing, we speak about the report from Prime Minister Mia Motley. The reason that the whole thing took a different turn is because somebody sent an email to the Prime Minister saying these guys are pursuing some madness at the Electoral Commission, and if you don't put a thing to it, then you're going to losing your election winning legacy. I mean, to me, that is so clear. And what happened immediately after that is that members of the Election Commission were changed. People were removed and other people replaced them. And then you had a whole new direction in what was going on there. And so today, what I think we're saying is a result of that. So is it in fact, as Justice Dr. Irving Andre is predicting, is this something that is ominous, that there is some predictable result, some outcome that is intended by all of this? So why is it that we're not hearing a convening of a conference of all parties, including the Labour Party as just a one component of this thing, and all the NGOs and civil organizations, and let's sit down and discuss? And why not take into account studies done by the OAS and CARICOM and Mia Motley, and look at what St. Kitts and Jamaica? Why are we only getting this survey? And I know you have a lot more to say about that survey, Alex. So let's hear you, Alex, some more on this.
Yeah. Well, you have some very big questions which I've been asking too, or suggesting too, that we should speak in one accord. We should sing as one big choir. There are more people who share the view that we share. no, than they who don't. And what is really taking place is you don't need to be a scientist to understand that. The system has put mechanisms in place to frame a particular narrative on reform that suits the incumbent. It is clear as day. And no matter how much we shout at us who are trying to call attention to it, it will not make it right. And I don't think the people quite understand what is going to happen to Dominica if we just continue to sit back. Because we're talking about now about an issue where a letter was sent to the prime minister saying, look, madness is taking place in the commission. That was how long ago? 15 years ago almost. And 15 years after we're talking about it, I guarantee you that if we do not combine our efforts to deal with this much bigger monster, we will be speaking about that which is going to happen for the next 40 years. There's a likelihood that this will be the case, because if the status quo gets its way and implement the kind of reform that the status quo wants, game over. I mean, in oppressive regimes and situations like these, when we transition from, let's say, authoritarianism to totalitarianism and stuff like that, the people are the last to know. And when people realize what's happening, that's where you have a lot of violence and fight and strife. And at that time, the country already spoiled. You can hardly come back from a totalitarian state into a democracy. You may, but it's going to take time. I mean, think of getting Cuba back from what Cuba is to a democracy. That's almost impossible. Dominica can get there if we allow it to get there, because there are more people who share the view that we share. And as you said, Mr. G, we just have to find a mechanism to bring color Congress. I've said so publicly on very many occasions. Let us have a Congress of all the minds. We hear one set preaching violence over there. We here trying our best to educate. And Dion did a fascinating job. I felt as if I was in his class, because that's the kind of stuff we do in the class, to teach the students about knowledge and the opinion, how we do polls and stuff like that, how we gather, how we measure people's opinion. That was timely, Dion, because Dominicans need to understand those things from the nitty-gritty. I'm happy you did it. So Dominicans do not quite understand what is happening until they understand, and it's going to be too late. And as the good Dr. Andre said, there might be some strife, there will be some uprising, but at that time we already gone down the hill, and the elites will just be saying, well, call in the military and take care of the situation for the next 30, 40, 50, 60 years. We are at risk of losing our country. It cannot be that one set of ruling class has to continue ruling, no matter how good the class is, no matter how wonderful we love our people. It just does not happen in any civilized part of the world where democracy reigns supreme. It is 20 years already of one regime, and that regime alone appointed a commissioner to deal with reform. First of all, that's a flawed appointment. There should be a general team of Dominicans, of people with different interests in reform, doing that. Not one prime minister appointing the reform and giving the parameters of the reform and saying, look, go and do it. We already started bad, and that was done before the commission was constituted. Now the commissioner said, look, the commission should give me the letters, which there was a delay with that, and that happened. So it cannot be that one party, the leader of one party, is the one determining how reform goes when everybody in the country wants the reform. So a lot of things have been done, and the people may not understand it as much as I would like them to. It frustrates me, because tomorrow the people are going to wake up and realize that we would have lost our system, lost our country. To what? To passivity? To just accepting that is my party or my prime minister and they can do no wrong? Well, trust me, based on my understanding of how system works, as much as I love the prime minister as everybody does, and the regime as everybody loves, I love Dominica more. And I think we're at risk of losing our beautiful system, our beautiful country, our democracy, our processes, if we cannot stand up and call things for what they are. And I know there are people who speak with me off here who know what is happening, who know Dominica is being cooked into a totalitarian state. They know that. No, I'm not going to call it as a professional, because I don't want it to be said that Alex Bruno said that. But we know where Dominica is heading. And they know better, but they are getting satisfaction from Dominica going there with short-sightedness. They're not seeing that later on in life that Dominica is going to be hemorrhaging. Just for a quick fix. And I'm calling out again to the people, the professionals who know better. Let's stand up. I'm already 50 years. If I cannot speak about what I think is going on wrong in my country, when will I ever be able to speak? I have the competence, I have the understanding, I have the training, I have the credentials. Why can't I say it now? And there are other people with bigger credentials than Dr. Andre and Dion and Dr. George and myself. Let us save our country. Let us please. Anu fesa pou Dominic Gassa. Anu pa gaspiller ça pour fesa nous pour faire parce que là nous perd pays, nous pas kenny d'autres pays. Regardez ces Haïtiens, moi aimé ces Haïtiens ou ça. But they have lost their country. Let us not please gamble for our country's future. 20 years of one government is enough. So, and again, there are those who blame the people and calling people all kind of names. I don't blame my people, you know. My people don't understand, and I wish Dion could continue doing a program like this on Q, just teaching the basics, politics 101, so all people can have a. I tried it too, you know, Dion, but I got a little frustrated, so I left it, you know. But probably you should take off from where I left off, you know, and let's try to help our people, especially the younger generation. Parce que we mean well, but I don't think we understand what is at stake. We cannot love our prime minister and our government more than we love our country. We cannot. And this tonight, probably that's my final hoorah, you know, because Mr. J, I warned you, do not call me to get on the radio, you know, because I find it's like you're beating a dead horse. Because there are people in the system who knows what is going wrong, and they're bigger than me, they have more money than me, they're more independent than I am, hiding, dodging to say the things that's wrong in our country. That's a plea. So in 10, 15 years from now, people will say, Alex had said, my children and my grandchildren will not hold me responsible. I am saying it. Even if they do not like me, they could castigate me, but I am putting it on the records here on Q95, that if we do not take this thing serious, you see this poll that people say, forget about it, that is not a thing you should forget about. Dion explained it. That is a very significant tool that is being sharpened to be used as a brand. Here's what the people say they want. I give it to them. All shut up, take what's coming. And for the next 15, 20 years, and I think it's Andre Jorgen who said it, and I think I mentioned it too. We have a bloated list of 71,000 people, voters on the list. And that list is being manipulated by the people who control the system to have people vote on names that are not in Ireland, people who have died, people who couldn't travel this time to vote. So the people who did not come into Dominica this time still voted because they are ghost floating voters that the organizers of the voting system told me face to face that they are doing. I will not call names of my informants. There was one group operated by somebody from who live in Guadeloupe, and there was another group operated by somebody else of 40, 50 people each, taking them around to vote on names that they know are not going to come in this time to vote. So the numbers which came in to vote in Dominica was less than the election before because they didn't have to get them in. They changed the system to have people vote on those names that's not going to come in. So if you have that problem with 71,000 people, can you imagine the opinion you're going to get from the entire world? Because anybody can subscribe to the poll and give results that them are going to use and say, look, that is overwhelming, no dogs back. Here's your reform you wanted, take what you want. And to me, that's the problem I'm seeing with the poll. That's the problem I'm seeing with what is happening now. And I'm asking, please, that Dominicans do not fight, do not cause bloodshed. Just let's speak up, let's challenge the system. And I hope at the end of the day, when the poll results are given to us, because they're going to do it, no matter what, they're going to do it. They're going to do it. They're not going to pull back out, you know, they're going to do it. When the results are out, they need to tell us how many people responded to the poll. How many people? And how many responded 5 times, or 6 times, or 10 times, or 15 times? There's no way of knowing. There's no control variable. Dion is right. This poll should be dismissed. It should be abandoned. It should not be used. And I'm calling for it to be stopped. And I stop now.
No, Alex, I wanted to say this. I want to go, before I go to Dr. George, I want to go back to Dr. Andrew. But Dr. Andrew, earlier on, I said we cannot fool ourselves and know, as though we don't know, we don't know why this thing is going the direction it's going because of that email. Now, also, you see what Alex Bruno is saying about what we're going to get in the long run? Let us listen. We have been told, you know, what we're going to get. The Prime Minister said to us, he is going to be there for many years. And then after that, his son will succeed him. Let us ask ourselves a question. Is that what is intended by this exercise? In other words, the original exercise was being done by the Electoral Commission. It was going to affect his election winning legacy. So he was told, these fellas cannot do this madness. TUAO. They were removed, they were replaced, they're going in a different direction now. Dr. Andre, I want to go back to you. Is this what we are actually witnessing happening before? As I said before, hiding in plain sight, happening to us right there. Your mic.
You made reference to the fact that this is hiding in plain sight. I disagree with you. It is not hiding at all. It is clear as day. You remember in the last elections, there were articles on the DNO, and I think the chief electoral officer had announced an effort, an initiative to cleanse the voters list. And there was a senior counsel who pontificated. He has no discretion to do that. How absurd. How ridiculous. How asinine. In which Caribbean island can you, with a straight face, tell the chief electoral officer he has no jurisdiction or discretion to cleanse the voters list? That, again, is another ingredient in the recipe for perpetual rule. For perpetual rule. It's quite clear. Why are we even discussing this? There's no mystery about this. Every indication is there. Look at the demonization of the opposition. Whether or not I agree with everything the opposition does is besides the point. But whether you like it or not, they are part of the system of governance as set out under our Constitution. They should not be vilified, ostracized, criminalized, persecuted. Even their batteries are being charged when their tires are not being slashed. None of the complaints lodged by them are investigated. Can you believe that? Let alone anyone charged. Tires have been slashed. Houses have been vandalized. Some have been openly assaulted. Nothing has come out of it. So there's nothing about hiding in daylight. This is in clear view for everyone to see. Did I not see the brutalization of some young man and his mother outside the police headquarters? Has anything come out of it? Didn't I see one of the fellows, Danny Lugay, being manhandled and Mon Daniel? Did anything come out of it? What about the death of this young fellow from Kings Hill? Has anything come out of it? No, there's no secret here. There's no secret here. And this is what we have to contend with. This is unfortunate. This is a rejection of the rule of law. That is what we have to be concerned about. If you are elected as a privilege. The voice of the people is the voice of God, people always say, but not when it is manipulated, not when it is bribed, or not when the offense of treason is committed by all and sundry, allegedly. You know, all that is being done for one single purpose. You don't have to go to university to understand that, to see that. It's not only happening in Dominic, it's happening elsewhere. People like Alex Bruno, Alwyn Bully, certainly, Hyacinth to a lesser degree, in their own plays, they have highlighted the obsession to power by tin pot dictators, not only in the Caribbean, but in other parts of the world. The messianism, the belief that they and they alone, they are the chosen ones. We have seen it in Shakespeare's Macbeth. Didn't Macbeth believe that no man or woman born could defeat him? And he was undone, not by a man who was born of woman, but he was born through what we call today a cesarean section, for God's sake. So after a while, this absolute power, it becomes a vaccine, it becomes a virus. It becomes an all-consuming virus. It kills all the good within you. And what is left is just that lust and the thirst and everything bad to the detriment of your island. That is what the danger is, why persons have to talk about it. Because you might as well dump the rule of law into your pit latrine if you have one.
Yes, and Dr. Andre, I want to go back to Lambie, because I know that we were having some technical difficulty. I hope Showin is able to assist us in clearing up some of these problems. So Lambie, let's take some calls if you can.
We have a call on the line. We apologize for keeping it this long. Are you still there, caller? Go ahead, please. On the overseas line, please go ahead with your call.
Yes, Dominicans are now in what we will call a political coma. Whatever happened to Dominicans in the 70s? Whatever happened to them? I mean, come on. Can anybody tell me that Dominican policemen could have gone to Barbados, Trinidad, like when we had the last election, and used tear gas on the people in first place? I would like to see Dominican policemen going to any one of these islands and use tear gas on those people. They could never even get to it because they'd be going back to Dominica, the bloody box. Yet you allow them to come to Dominica, use tear gas on the people who were sleeping. You're living in a socialist country. There's no doubt about it. Guys, stop dreaming. Stop dreaming. You're already there. Your hospital is named after China Friendship. From Princess Margaret Hospital to China Friendship. And the bloody guys who on the radio station saying that. Defy these people, man. Defy them. Something happened in America, Dominicans will be calling the radio station. Yet they kill someone in the police station. The bishop and everybody opens will open his mouth on what happened in America, but fails to open his mouth on what happens in Dominica. I'm so fed with this bloody idiot. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. Yes,
Yeah, good evening.
good evening.
Good evening to all on the program. Very good program. My concern is, if I pay a man $500,000 to do a project for me, would he do it for anyone else, or they want it? The integrity of the country? That can never happen. Because I don't see me to bring in a foreigner. I don't look at him as a sin. I look at him as a buccaneer when entering Dominica as a pirate. Because the money they're behind, they're not concerned about the welfare of the people and the country. And that's a dangerous thing. The Prime Minister is paying Byron $500,000 to come on this dirty route. Because we can't have somebody going to come online and to recommend how the election should go. If you have to go vote, you have to come in the country, go all over the country, and listen to the views of the people in the different constituencies. That's how we should vote. And matter of fact, it shouldn't work like that because we don't know what needs to be done. Simply the electoral commission should do the route and get things done. To the list, and all the other things like the get everybody should have equal access to the media, and also be able to clean up the list, and everybody be happy. not our society, no party, no government should be controlling nothing. It should be a balance. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that, Colin. A good contribution.
Good evening, caller. Please go on with your call.
Yes, good evening, Lambi.
Yes.
Good evening to the panel. Lambi, Mr. G, I call to say how much I am disappointed of some brilliant persons. I mean, well educated persons, I would have said, during that time that Mr. Byron was to come to whatever work he had to do, to say that they give him a chance to do what he's supposed to do. Mr. G, I always knew that nothing good was going to be done for Dominica if the Prime Minister can pay somebody over $500,000 to come in our country to do something for us that we can do. Something had to be wrong. I always knew that he had a plan, and so I am disappointed of those persons I know that they are brilliant, well educated, that keep on saying, let Mr. Byron give him a chance. He had no chance to do nothing. Good night.
Good night, contribution. And you want to take it more important, Lambi, or should we go right ahead?
Caller, please go ahead briefly.
Yes, no, at last I can say that events cast shadows before them, they are often told. But let me, before I make my contribution, let me say good night to Dr. George out there. Let me say good night to Alex and our other colleague.
Dr. Andrew.
Yes, let me thank them for being so informative. But as I said, it's often said that events cast shadows before them. But I believe we are looking for the shadow when the event is upon us. Dominica is in a full-fledged dictatorship. None so blind as he who will not see. And I can say it clearly again, none so blind as he who will not see. Every technique in the book, everything that our dictator is trying is to ensure that he keeps himself in power. Now using those Byron to do a so-called survey among persons like me who are living on the internet, just to turn around and see if something that Dominica has done. That's a trick, and every right thinking Dominican should not fall for it. But as I say to you again, I believe we call Dominica paradise, but it's my personal opinion that I'm living in a fool's paradise. My brothers, I am listening. And good night.
Well, thank you for your contribution. Very valid contribution. Now, you want to take a couple more calls?
Yes. Caller, please go ahead with your call.
Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. G. All your person. My radio name, what's on the ground?
Good.
Not laughing. Panel, it is something I don't understand in terms of the education our people in Dominica have as to what is their rights. I think our people is scared, although it is in Constitution. One of the things I see quite a few years ago, that Dominica will not out from the clause of this government unless the people are able to stand up for their rights. This stealing and manipulating of the election, I have gone through that. I understand it. But the system that is operating is against the people, and it is well captured. The people have a right, and if they use their rights, whatever is operating is they in charge of them. Is you employing them? Is you electing them? But because you're not standing up when it comes to questioning them, you're not going to fight with them, you know. You're going to pull up. The country going to come at a
still everybody want to hear something with an official. The outcome of the discussion will find a settlement because our people have the rights. But when we trampling on the rights, the people of Salisbury in the night before election take gas. The people of Maricot, police and ambush ready. In Wesley, they break up everything that the people were standing for. And the people don't understand they have a right. We need to be able to tell the people their rights, the day for the rights is coming. And it's on the 13th of this month. Dominica have been pregnant for 21 years and it's in labor trying to deliver. Our people need to wake up. Our country is a blessed country. But unless we stand up, nobody will do what we have to do for us. On the 13th, we need to know that Dominicans, some people buying their ticket to come down, even to have the time quarantine, to come and stand up to represent ourselves peacefully, to know that Dominica can give birth to a baby 21 years. It cannot come out. And if that baby is dead, Dominica can never rise. You hear talking about electoral reform? That reform is a plan to bury Dominicans. We never going to rise. We need to wake up and put some Dominicans from home and abroad. The family, those that are down here, mobilize your brother and sister on the first. From here, we need to go down and decide we come to stand. All right, here peacefully and go back to law. There's a law. There's a constitution. No one is bigger than the law. We need to understand that. And if we get that done, Dominica will rise. Other than that, my battle for Dominica is over. This is boots on the ground. Bye, good night.
Thanks a lot and good night. Lamb, you want to take another call?
Yes, one more call. Go ahead, please, caller. It's your turn.
Good evening, Lambi, and the panelists.
Good evening.
A question I would like to ask. If Byron is that wise and eloquent about constitution and laws, when Skerrit approached him to do what he wants him to do for him, why didn't he advise him that it is illegal and he needs to go to the 5-member commission? They are the only one who is in authority to have election reform. Therefore, I don't consider Byron as that of a smart man, as everybody keeps saying, because what he's doing is totally against Dominica. And if Skerrit loves Dominica, he will not be doing what he is doing right now, because he's just stalling and he does not want election reform. Have a good night.
And good night to you as well. I'm taking a call, Andy. Or shall we go on? Okay, let us just go ahead. I want to thank all the callers and I want to thank all the people who are on Facebook and making comments. I'm happy to have you with us tonight. As I go over to you, Dion, I just want to make the case again, because you can hear the consistent refrain coming from the callers. They're saying it in different ways. They're articulating the views in different, but they're really saying the same thing. Look, we know we have to call a spade, and I'm going to repeat what I get, but expense of repeating myself. I mean, the only reason why this particular process of reform is taking place, the genesis is in this email that says you cannot go that way, you have to go a different way, otherwise you will lose your election winning legacy. That tells us, gentlemen, that somebody's saying, listen, the only reform I want is the one that is going to help me to maintain my election winning legacy. Now, having been told I'm going to be there for 20 years or 50 years, and when I finish, I'll let my son take over. Does that tell us something about election winning legacies and who people want to succeed them and be in power forever? Is that something that we should also be taken seriously? Listen, is this a democracy? That's the way democracies operate. I know that our learned friend, Dr. Dion George, will tell us some more about that, about the pillars of our democracy and how they should operate. But the fact of the matter is, we've had discussions, Dr. Andre and Alex and Dion George. We've had discussions before about electoral reform and about campaign finance reform. And we've gone the way other people who have done it successfully have gone. You must have campaign finance reform. You cannot tell me that you have one party of $100 million and you don't even know where it's coming from. You don't know where this big money, what influence they have, what direction they want the country to go, whether they just want to perpetuate one person in power so they can have somebody who they're bleeding. We don't know that. I mean, so you don't know where the money is coming. No checks and balance on your money is coming from. You must have the campaign finance laws. I believe you should have a fix it for election. This notion that somebody can say, I have the date in my back pocket and I give it to my baby and I will, when the time comes, I will let you know, and so on. To me, this makes no sense. This makes this country look like a joke. And then, of course, you must, look, I think it's Alex Bruno who said it earlier. He said, 20 years is much too long for one government to be in office and one leader to be in office. 20 years is too long. I mean, children who are 30 years old now, I mean, they only know one government. People who are 40 years old now practically know one government. They don't need any government before that. I think it is time for us to grow up as people and understand that we have, and I think Alex is right. You need to continue that education about the politics, the 101, to let our population we have to get more politically educated, more savvy. So we'll understand it makes no sense. I might like somebody. That does not mean that we are to leave them in power forever. It doesn't mean you dislike them if you remove them and try somebody else, You don't dislike them. Nobody disliked Barack Obama, but he was only there for 2 terms. Somebody else replaced him. Biden can only be there for 2 terms. Somebody else will replace him. It doesn't mean you do not like them, but you have to have succession in democracy. So I'm saying, Dion, that we have to continue, and that is what we're doing here tonight. There's no malice, there's no dislike of anybody. I think we're just trying to say, listen, what is the right thing to do? Because we can see signs that we're on the wrong path. And I'll tell you why I say that. Because let us face it, all of this politics and elections is for a certain purpose, The democracy is to take care of people. I mean, if people are not being taken care of, don't we see the level of poverty that exists in America? Are people being taken care of? Do we see the level of mendicancy that is there? Are people really being taken care of? People really have health care. Some people don't want to go to the doctor and pay, because even if they go to the doctor, they may not be able to find the money to fill the prescription. How can you tell me how people are being taken care of? And we went through how many crises since 2017, hurricanes and storms and COVID-19 and so on. And taxi operators, first of all, we have reduced our farmers to drive buses. They did not want to do that, but the economy somersaulted on them. Now they're trying to make a living and we're telling them, listen, we cannot give you any kind of compensation, although we put a law that says you can only carry 2 people or 3 people. How can that be? Are we taking care of our people? Are we taking care of our farmers when they can't sell their produce? How can we say that? So, yes, we need the democracy. The whole idea is to take care of our people. People must be able to thrive. So I want to go over to somebody who knows a lot better than me and speaks better English than I can. Dr. Dion George, your further thoughts on all of that?
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Gregoire. I will just say this, it's amazing, and I'm so thankful that even while we're having discussion here tonight, that I can hear thunder rolling outside of my house, and I can hear lightning. Well, I can see the lightning, and it's pouring rain. Hopefully, the current is not interrupted. And also, I want to say thank you to Professor Bruno and to you, Mr. Gregoire, for the commendation of the American government or political science 101. Of course, I would never shy away from community service or from civic duty of educating people. That's part of my life calling, but that's only if time permits. But thanks nonetheless. Several thoughts came through my mind while we were listening to the callers, and of course, thank you callers for your contribution. One of the thoughts that came to my mind is the view in political science that change is important in democracies, but there's a caveat, and the caveat is this, that people who resist change typically are those who benefit from the system, and that's often in the minority, and that persons who want change indeed often are the oppressed, and very often that's the masses. That is why it's important to have institutions that would generate a system of processes that would engage for meaningful changes within a democracy. Paramount among institutions is the constitution of any democracy. And one of the things we as Dominicans have to come to realize is if we observe and if we can see elements that are anti-democratic, and perhaps individuals have found ways to work within the framework of the system that we have to perpetuate their incumbency, that perhaps the view of looking at constitutional reform is important. Of course, constitutional reform is not simply for Dominica. Most democracies are evolving, they are growing, there are amendments, and so we are not foreign to the idea of maintaining a healthy democracy. And so the whole idea of electoral reform, again, the issue of term of office is a salient one. I really do think moving forward, whether it is with this administration or any administration coming in, importantly needs to reform the Constitution to institute the whole idea of term limits for the head of state and of course for the head of government and perhaps even members of parliament as well. And so that's number one. That is why I think with this survey by Sir Dennis Byron, I want to make it clear that there can be utility within surveys. Indeed, there can. I will say that data drives policy, and that statement is true not only in government, that data drives policy, but that statement is true also in business, right? And so where we have an exercise where one gleans information, of course, there can be some utility where that is concerned. The question that becomes interesting tonight, what we are having, is what will that data be used for? And what sort of policies will come out of it? And that is why I really think, Mr. Gregoire, you made some point about having civic groups, political parties, perhaps even religious groups, and other stakeholders to be part of that whole electoral reform. And I must say, I concur. I honestly concur that we should have a plethora of a diversity of groups to be part of that exercise. I will give credit for something I forgot to mention. I thought it was really interesting that in the end of the survey that I took, that is the survey, of course, constituted by Sir Byron, there is a question, believe it or not, on electoral reform. Yeah, one of the questions actually says that, do you believe there should be a cap on the amount of money spent for election? Yeah, and it was a sort of a normative question. One other thing I would like to mention as we discuss this very important issue is also the idea that in the end of the survey, there were some structured questions. And so what you had in the beginning were normative questions, yes or no, or satisfied or not satisfied. And of course, then it moved to the interval questions, strongly agree, disagree, or I do not know. And at the end of the survey, there were some structured questions where you had to literally write in your answers. And for example, they were asking, what do you believe are the changes that are required, right? And they were asking the respondents to tell them what they believe are the changes that are required. And my thoughts on that, interestingly, is that I believe the OAS, I believe the Electoral Commission in Dominica, I believe on this program, these recommendations have been echoed over and over again. And so, again, the ultimate question is, what would this survey be used for? And I think, I don't know. That's, I think, is really the important question. Thank you.
You know, Dr. Andre, I'm thinking that if this process there does not embrace all of that body of work that has already been done by all these groups like NJAM and all these, NGOs and so on that have come together, including the church, civil society, trade unions, and so on, they have produced a body of recommendations. And I'm pretty sure that they've taken into account all of the work that has been done in St. Kitts, where Sir Dennis Byron is from, all of the work that has been done in Antigua, where one of our own luminaries, Justin Simon, was involved in a very, very specific way in it. And they did their work very quickly and efficiently. And in Jamaica. And so if this does not embrace that body of work by convening a conference of all parties, and the Labour Party cannot be treated as if it is something special. It is just one of the parties involved, because the Prime Minister and the government, they are from the Labour Party. So whatever they do it on behalf of, in the interest of the Labour Party. So obviously, you have to have a conference of parties with all ideas content. And look, let me just say this as well. I mean, I have absolutely nothing against Sir Dennis Byron. I have nothing against people doing consultancies and getting paid. But I mean, wouldn't the OAS have paid for that study? As a matter of fact, they've done the body of work already. If Dominic had asked the OAS to pay for that kind of consultation, to have a local group of experts, you have so many Dominicans at home and abroad who would help. There are people like Ray Harris, for God's sake, who have so much experience in those things. Wouldn't they have a committee to do this with? And the OAS might have contributed money. Why take money out, this $500,000, as you said earlier, Dr. Andre, that taxi operators need and that farmers need and so many people need, and give it to Dr. I mean, I have no problem if Sir Dennis Byron making some money too, but I mean, but there's so many people in Dominica who might need it more than him. Dr. Andre, your thoughts? Your mic.
The difficulty is this. The difficulty rests in the assumptions underlying the efforts to cherry pick an expert to produce the desired result. We've had as Dr. George has referred to, a plethora of reports from third-party organizations, OS, UN, others right here in Dominica, who have given reports as to the parameters of real, honest-to-goodness electoral reform. It's no mystery. It's not rocket science. Our sister islands have gone through the process. So there is really no need to look for some wisdom hidden under some culvert or in some legal briefcase anywhere. There's no need for that. There is no need for this. Because the answer is right there. It's not blowing in the wind. It's right there. There's no mystery about it. It's not rocket science. So there is method in that madness. It is to produce a desired result. to circumvent what electoral reform really means, to produce a different result. There's no mystery about this. It's quite clear. That is why, as I said, the self-assuredness of undertaking or promising or seeking the opposition's approval to take the report without scrutiny and enact it almost immediately, because the results are predictable. That's the problem. Both Dr. George and Dr. Bruno are political scientists. They're experts. They've told you about the deficiencies of the survey. It will not achieve what it seeks to achieve. If Joe Blow from Montserrat, poor Mr. Black from Guyana, who the students in the States can give their 2 cents worth in answering the survey, then what assurances do you have that it's even Dominicans who are filling out? If one participant can submit 10 responses to the survey, what is the legitimacy and the integrity of that survey? It has none. And if that is the case, then again, the answer is clear. There is method to this madness. The method is to produce a result which is palatable to those who control the purse strings in Dominica. That is not what democracy is all about. It is not what the rule of law is all about. And that is the peril that we face.
And the peril that we face is the clock at the moment, and so we're coming down to the wire. So, Dr. George, I know you have a few comments you want to make as we close down. You can just use the opportunity to make your closing remarks as well, because I think that, I mean, it's very clear from everything that we have said, from everything that the observations that our callers have made, that this process that is being undertaken now is quite wrong. I mean, it's obviously, it looks like it's intended to get a specific result, as Dr. Andrew said, which is totally different, apparently, from the result that the Electoral Commission was looking for, because the Electoral Commission, it was said that they were doing some madness. They're going the wrong way. They lost their way. We need to take them out, put some other people in there, which is what happened. And now we see the other direction, Dr. George. And clearly, the direction we're seeing does not, there's one little mention of campaign finance reform at the end of the survey. But I mean, we spent hours on this particular radio station, on this particular program, talking about the detailed campaign finance reforms. And I remember Dr. Andre looked at all of the Caribbean countries and he looked at exactly what it is that they were recommending and what exists there. And we know that the suggestion is to have an independent, first of all, an independent electoral commission, not as it is currently comprised, because it has no private and NGO sector representation. You have the government as a preponderance of representatives skewed in the government's favor, the incumbent government's favor. And there is no representation of civil society in there. So we know you cannot get anything going in an open and the correct direction. It's going to be skewed, obviously. It's human nature. Now, Dr. George, we know from our shows here, we recommended that the Independent Electoral Commission should be given certain amount of resources, and that commission would give the parties resources, and those parties would spend those resources and account for them, and they should not spend more than a certain amount within a certain window of time. And if they receive money from outside of that, they should account for it, and it should not be more than a certain amount in order to ensure that big money does not influence the outcome of election or influence policy in their direction when the election is over and the government is installed. I mean, all of that we went through, and there was specified amongst in different countries for that, and it's working very well in Jamaica now. The elections are going very smoothly. And of course, the fixed terms and the fixed date, this is not rocket science. Why can't we just go along with it? And are the people of Dominica going to say, look, all of these countries that are doing this, things are going well. And are we going to say it's okay, let's just stay silent and let this thing happen, and we're not going to have this fixed election date, we're not going to have fixed terms, we're not going to have a campaign finance laws, and just go along and think that we're going to have a democracy? We should know that we're not going to have a democracy, and it's clear that we're not on the way to a democracy if we continue on the path that. So, Dr. Dion, George, your final thoughts and your closing remarks?
Thank you very much, Mr. Gregoire. I guess that's why they call you Mr. G, and I guess that's why they call you the big station, because I mean the way you wrap that up there, I don't think anybody could have make it so in sync with all that we are talking about. But I must piggyback on one of the points that you made, the recognition that campaign finance reform ought to be a huge part of this whole reform process. And I think it was very brilliant on your part to identify that it was one question that dealt with it at the end of the survey. And I think, if I recall clearly, it was one of those questions that would less likely be answered. I think it was one of the structured questions. And typically in surveys, people don't like to write. People like to answer things in bullet points. But I guess what you were perhaps alluding to is the view that a more serious effort must be made towards campaign finance reform. And of course, yes, I concur that we did spend a lot of time talking about different models, making suggestions, even having a national campaign fund, having penalties for those who violate it, etc. And so I think the purpose of this discussion, I think sometimes it really meets its intent. You know, like for example, tonight, the whole idea of talking about public opinions and what is the use of public opinions to try to bring this whole survey of Sir Dennis Byron into a conceptual understanding of really what it is its purpose, and talking about political socialization and the things that can influence the way that people think, talking about how are surveys measured and the importance of having a controlled population, or if not population, but a controlled sample, and the idea of the current survey being uncontrolled in several ways. One of them, of course, being its infinity in terms of the people that could take it, in terms of the geography of those folks. It makes you wonder what is the utility of persons who have nothing to do with Dominica. That's number one. But number two, the whole idea that it is repetitive, i.e. someone can have several submissions. And of course, that would totally make the results of it null and void. And this is not to criticize perhaps the efforts, but when one looks at surveying and opinion polls, and one looks at it statistically, these are the points that must be brought to the listening public. And so, of course, I want to thank you very much for the opportunities. I did spend some time looking at some specific questions and my thoughts on them. Of course, I give credence to the idea that there was some positives of it, but the ultimate question is what is the purpose and whether some of those questions really meet it. So I appreciate my panelists, of course, Professor Bruno, of course, I always appreciate Dr. Andre. Thank you very much, Sherwin and Lambi, always. And to the listening public, thanks for the time. Mr. Gregoire, appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes, and thanks a lot, Dr. Dion. George, Alex, as I go to you for your sort of winding down remarks and then your closing final remarks, I mean, I like the notion that we talk about this whole question of public opinion and people's opinion. But Alex, as you yourself said earlier, and you encouraged Dr. Dion George to provide that kind of information and education so that we can have an informed and educated political, electorate, that people can take informed decisions. So it's not just a matter of public opinion, because if you're going to fill out a form, you have to be able to make informed decisions and choices in filling out that form. And as we know, Alex, it's not simply because you like a political party or your father, your grandfather was a member of that political party that a particular leader, a particular government that is of the day the incumbent, that the decisions that they're taking are necessarily in your best interest. You may love them, yes, but does not mean you must love them more than you love yourself, or you love them more than you love your country. And so it seems to me that sometimes people have to make difficult choices. And if you think that the people at the head are not really taking you down the road that is really making more sense to you, you have to say, listen, fellas, step aside a little bit, you'll come back. Will and come again. I love you, but basically you're not cutting it right now. We got to try something else, and we'll come back again. That does not mean you don't love your party, but the point is you love your country more. And so I believe the whole question of the political education here is to ensure that people can make informed choices. And that is why it is very critical, in my view, that when we do this electoral reform, we must put fixed dates, fixed terms, so that it takes it out of our discretion. So it can only be fixed 2 terms, and that's it. All right, then we don't have to have that discretion. So Alex, your final thoughts on some of those as we wrap.
Well, I think best reform would be achieved when the incumbent is changed. That can be a very easy selling point because the majority of Dominicans would like it. I think the party which runs and say, look, I am the reform party, put me in, I'll change the system. That can be a narrative as well. Secondly, a caller called and was very harsh on Dominicans, and that's one of the rhetoric that is not working, because Dominicans do not take it lightly when people call them names, because these are the same people you're saying should step up. Now, when Dominicans step up, I hope we can deal with what is going to happen, because Dominicans will be stepping up on their own volition with no leadership, and that can be more deadly than what people are asking for. So that's 2. Now, I heard somebody said about something for May 13. I look at the clock, the time is, today is May 4. So whatever it is that they're doing is 9 days time. Herein lies the problem. We are here talking about working together. All minds. The way His Excellency did in the 70s, organizing beneath the surface, galvanizing support. And I'm hearing now on radio, to my greatest astonishment, an event, some boots on the ground event for the 13th. I mean, what about October 2, which is Charles Saverin's birthday? What about October 3, E.O. Leblanc's birthday? What about August 29, which is E.O. Leblanc's, Isidore Black's birthday? If you are doing something, put some meaning to it and invoke the spirits of those people who are able to get the people moving. What 9 days time, boots on the ground where? How is that? I mean, I hope it works. But this is the problem, Mr. G, when people are just so knee-jerk reaction. So we always say, oh, protest fail, this fail. The people, not the people, it's the people leading the people. And I think the people leading the people must understand that we have a bigger mission to move away, get other people involved who can assist, and let's do it together. That thing of going it alone and pulling aside is not working for the masses of the people. Dominicans know what they want what they want, but they will not have it manifested in the way that they want because the leaders are so divided. And there are more people who want what it is that Dominicans want than people who do not want it. So that case, I'm not really calling it down, but that case, I should not be surprised or shocked today hearing on the radio that there is a boots on the ground event for 9 days time. How are you going to mobilize 5,000 people in 9 days? How are you going to tell the lady who has a child, a disabled child, that she must in 9 days time come out to do a protest for me, that she has no clue, that she didn't plan a week or 2 weeks in advance for? This doesn't make sense. So if we're going to do this, we might as well do it, because the other side is very organized. Look at what they are doing in terms of the vaccinations with the reform. No, I do not think, and people should not cast aspersions against Byron. I mean, he's a fantastic professional. Because when he was called and given the job, he said to the Prime Minister, look, I cannot accept or start without a commission. So at least he did that, and he's doing what he's doing. I don't think he's doing anything illegal. He's working. It is the system that's manipulating the work that he is doing. So we should not destroy him. We should go back at the people who control the system and give him the mandate. It's not so Byron. I love the man. He's a good Caribbean person, and we should not demonize him. If somebody's giving me a $500,000 to do a job in Grenada, I'm going to say no. I'm going to do it. Now, if they manipulate and fix things behind my back, that's a matter for them. But as a professional, I present what I think is a professional undertaking. So I think we have to be very careful how we adjust our Dominicans. When we're organizing things, let's get people involved. And at the end of the day, the responsibility for country lies in our hands. One set of people can't do it. It has to be everybody to do it. Mr. G, I'm tasking you the responsibility to bring the parties together, Mr. G. NJAM cannot do it, you know. NJAM don't have the mandate to bring people together. Somebody like you did it in the past, Mr. G. The Committee for National Salvation, 1979. Mr. G, do it again. Bring the people together meaningfully. So what we have in now among us, have it among everybody else on the ground for at least 2, 3, 4 weeks. Let us plan. Let us go to the communities, recruit people, have some money, get some money spent, and mobilize at least 5,000 people. We can do it, but it has to be done. And that 13th announcement I heard there, to me, it just sent me insane. What is that again? Who is doing it? What is the $5,000 behind the thing? You can't get people out without money. You can't get people out without organization and strategy. What's the plan? What is the rallying call? Why the 13th? Why not on LeBlanc's birthday? On Alwyn Bully's birthday? Wake up one of the champions of our country. Why not on Dr. Andre's birthday? I rest my case.
Well, that's a very good question. Why not on Dr. Andre's birthday? Maybe he will answer that question. I believe the 13th, Alex, is a date when that case is supposed to go to the magistrate's court. I think that is where that date of the 13th, I think that is where that notion came from.
But why try to disrupt a matter that's going to go? Why try to bring people in a situation that's already tense? Stay away from that. Do it somewhere where you can invoke the spirit of somebody to help you. Leave that alone for the system to deal with. You know, there are different ways of having mass mobilization. There's already something happening. Why try to bring something else to happen on top of it? What is the justification? What's the sense in it? I don't see it. I really, really do not see it, Mr. G. I don't see it. I see it, but for one party. I don't see it for a nation. If you want people to come out, all and sundry, do it off, take it away from that partisan platform and offer it to Dominicans as a thing for Dominicans. Not which case? I don't know about the case. Probably I do.
But all right, so, well, our learned Dr. Andre might know a thing or two about a thing or two. And so he might give us some of his wisdom on some of that. But as I go to Dr. Andre, I mean it really, I mean, from our discussion here tonight, this is nothing new. We've been discussing these things for quite a while. So many recommendations have come from yourself and Dr. Dion George, and from people like Alex Bruno and people like Gabriel Christian and Crispin Gregoire and a host of other people who have been here with us and on other platforms talking about these issues. And we all know, as we've said over and over again, this is nothing new. It's not rocket science, not new. It's been done before in several other countries. I don't know why on earth in Dominica we're making it look as though it's something brand new that we're trying to invent some kind of new wheel to do something. It's not. It seems to me that the fact that we're going around beating around, it means that we don't want to get where we're supposed to get. That's why we're beating around the bush so much. If we want to get to where St. Kitts got to Antigua, let us take the path they took and got there and got to where Jamaica got. But we're dancing around in circles and never-ending circles. And so we don't know where we're going to be. We may continue dancing forever. But in the meantime, you have a perpetuation of one set of people in office. And in the meantime, the poor people seem to be getting poorer. And that is my problem. Because you see, if we're going to go this way, and the very people who support regimes in office are going to keep getting poorer and poorer, but they say in the last somebody is my government, say government knew and my father was there. It just cannot work. I think people like yourself and Dion George have a lot of work to do to help our people to understand, you know, they have to act in their best interest and the best interest of the country. All right. So Dr. Andre, your closing remarks.
Well, let me say that, first of all, let me thank you, Mr. G, for the human service that you're providing to the Dominican people. The fact of the matter is that you're doing so at great expense and sacrifice. I think it is well known that once a contrarian position is taken, then the wrath, not of God, of those who control the levers of power are brought to bear on you and on your station. And while I may not know the details of it, but I can well assume that in fact you've had to deal with some of those issues. Let me also commend Dr. Bruno and Dr. George for their candor, their wisdom, their intelligence, and their fearlessness in expressing their opinion, as should be done in a free and democratic society. The point of the matter is, just in reference to the 13th of May, my understanding is that that case, the case with treating, it is supposed to be started on the 13th. I may be wrong, but that's my understanding. And let me just say that that is a very significant case. The Dominican people will decide what day, what time, what month they will choose to take a stand. That's their decision, their prerogative. But the case is very significant because it goes to the whole fundamental question of the rule of law, whether the rule of law applies to one set of persons and whether it does not apply to others, whether in fact we have, as I said, two tiers of citizenship, one who can do as they wish and the others who have to adhere to the rule of law. So this is a very significant case. But again, as I said, it's not my prerogative to comment on the wisdom of any type of action which is taken on that date. The fact of the matter is, it is a very significant case, one which tests the mettle of Dominica as a democratic state and the mettle of Dominican people as citizens of a democratic state. But again, in terms of my conclusion, I take solace in the fact that there are a number of organizations who understand that whatever efforts they make have to be made in conjunction with each other. I take solace in the fact that the CCM has done some wonderful work on the ground. I take solace in the fact that NJAM has already started, in my view, making a difference, certainly in terms of the political discourse. I take solace in the fact that the concerned lawyers, again, have taken a brave stand in terms of making their voices count. And obviously, there are many persons associated with the opposition who, in my view, have done great work at great expense, had been ostracized, had been victimized, had been charged, persecuted, quite frankly, because of the positions they've taken. And the fact that people are prepared to do that, in my view, is testament to the fact that there lies within the bosom of Dominica persons who, quite frankly, have the best interests of the island at heart. And he understands only too well the personal sacrifice that they have to endure to ensure that the Dominica as we know it is preserved for future generations. And let's face it, every journey starts with one small step. We do not expect to have some massive uprising on day one of any struggle. It's a gradual process of the building of consciousness where people see the light, and they understand that what I have, the little I have, is worth preserving. It is worth preserving because there are persons who want to come to Dominica and to settle there and to make it their homes. We should welcome them. But at the same time, we have to ensure that they respect us. They respect our generosity. They respect our integrity. They respect the fact that we are an independent nation. We have our own values, our own culture, our indigenous writers, people like Alex, Bruno, and others, and that we have the capacity to build an independent nation which we can bequeath to our children. So I take solace in the fact that we have people who think along those lines, and that our leaders have to tap that reservoir of patriotism that exists, to tap deep into it, bring it to fruition, let it blossom, let it germinate, let it be a fruit, and let it be brought to the table or the tabernacle of Dominica and change it forever. Thank you very much to your listeners.
Amen.
To Schumann,
Yes, and thank you
and
so
to Bruno, and to George, and to the inimitable Mr. G. Thank you very much.
Yes, and thank you so much, Dr. Andre, and of course my friend Alex, and Dr. Dion George, and Lambi and Sherwin, and all of our cherished listeners and Q family listeners out there on Facebook and on many other platforms who are participating in this discussion. Happy that you were with us tonight. We were not able to take all of your calls as usual, but sometimes those things happen. But I just want to end and say, really, as I say good night and thanks to everybody, I just want to say, Dr. Andre and Alex and Dr. Dion George, and really, to me, there's some simple, basic, fundamental thing we would like to see as the outcome of all of this, which is what has happened in St. Kitts, what is happening in Antigua, what is happening in Jamaica. We can just simply follow the process and we will succeed. And it will not take that much time to succeed. And what do we want? We want to ensure that we have a process that is transparent. You don't want to have one group having any advantage over another. This is democracy, for God's sake. So you want to have a fixed election date. So everybody knows this election date is going to be on that date. You want to have an independent electoral commission where the incumbent party in office does not have any majority on that commission so that it can manipulate, because it's supposed to be independent. The government machinery is not supposed to have any influence on it. So you have fixed election dates and you have independent commission and you have 2 terms. I mean, fix the thing to 2 terms and forget about all this question of when I call election and my son will come after me. And so this is not helping democracy. I mean, we've seen democracies at work. We've seen socialism at work. We've seen dictatorships at work. We have chosen democracy. Let's stick with it. Let's cherish it. Let's promote it. Let's learn from it and keep growing in it. That's what I think. And I think that when people support the incumbent regime, that's fair. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with supporting a political party. Most of us here probably supported the Labour Party at one time or other. I don't know who we support now. But the point is that there's nothing wrong with people supporting parties. But what people should not do is support anything that is against their own interests and against the interests of their country. Because in the end, you want to have a country that you can bequeath to the kids that you leave behind, and the generations to come. And that is so important. And you want them to be able to say that we, the people who were there before us, we did our best to hand over to them the best that we could give at the time. We don't want them to say, but where were these guys? What did they do? How did we end up with this mess? So I don't think that is what we want for our children, and we should ensure that we don't get that kind of result. But the way things are going with this questionnaire, first of all, I agree with our panel. That thing probably should be set aside. And we should just convene, so Byron should convene a conference of all the parties, look at all of the documentation already done, look at the lessons learned in all these countries like St. Kitts and so on. Put it together. We don't need rocket science to do that if we want the right outcome. And campaign finance reform has to be a critical component of that electoral reform package. It must be, because money makes such a significant difference in campaigns and elections. We know that. It determines outcomes. You cannot bring in thousands of people from overseas without money. You cannot mobilize 10,000 people in any protest in Dominica without money. So money makes a difference in politics. So gentlemen, thank you so much for tonight. I feel enlightened by much of the conversation here tonight. I hope we did make a little difference in enlightening our listeners here tonight. So let me just say good night to everybody and thank you so much.
Good night. Good night, everyone.
Cheers.
Okay, take care, everybody. Till next time. Alex, take care, Alex, Dion, Andy, Dr. Andre. Good night, gentlemen.
Good night.
Okay.
Good night.